Hello everyone. Once again, let's get started. Like I said, that the other video is coming. I'll probably be linking to it from here. But for now, let's just get started with the highlights from today. The first one is from the voltage effect. So when an idea or intervention is vocally championed by a trusted or influential source who isn't necessarily an expert and may have their own agenda, it can result in others jumping on board. In cases like these, what seems like an honest consensus is in fact a false positive, in that any number of people in the room might have opposed the idea were it not for the desire to conform with views expressed by others. The next thing you know, the group has voted to scale a bad idea or to scale too soon before additional research can be done. All of which could have been avoided had the leader instead listened carefully to others, understood that implicitly forcing a consensus is not the same as building a consensus, and been wary of bandwagon bias. So the idea were this book, the voltage effect. It's about scalability. It talks about economics of scale, and what are the different biases that affect our ability to scale. And the highlight talks about this scenario where you have an idea and a person who is naturally charismatic, for example, naturally trusted or influential, even if they don't know much about the topic itself, they they throw in the support for the idea, and now because they have been trusted, because they're influential or charismatic, they have now this idea now has supporters, a lot of followers. And the risk is that because this person may not have a lot of knowledge about this particular issue, and decision has been made because there has been this support pouring in, because this person was naturally trusted and influential, the group votes to scale a bad idea or scale too soon, when before additional research can be done, like the highlight says. And that's one of the problems that happens. The author has repeatedly seen in his studies about scaling. And yeah, it's a rather long highlight. I think it covers the entire context in itself, so there's not much left for me to explain the context over here. Bias is something, as a leader, it is something that's very important for you to keep in mind, that there can be bias within a group, within individuals, within ourselves. And I really like this line: implicitly forcing a consensus is not the same as building a consensus. Having somebody influential come and sway a room is one thing, but and that may force a consensus, but that's not the same as building a consensus. There have been a lot of discussions, uh, for example, in my own organization, about uh, how to make decisions, when to wait for consensus. For example, when we are voting, when we are waiting for everybody to have their say, that for example, we have this principle of being open, and we like to get inputs from literally everybody on the team. But how is that possible? How are you going to make that happen when there are about 200 people in the whole organization? A lot of discussions around there. And this line reminds me of all of those struggles, all of those challenges that we have faced in kind of building a consensus. What else could we do to build a consensus rather than forcing a consensus because we need to make a decision right now? So yeah, I think I don't really have much more to add over here, so let's move on. Originals. Intuitive investors are susceptible to getting caught up in an entrepreneur's enthusiasm. Analytical investors are more likely to focus on the facts and make cold judgments about the viability of the business. So the author is talking about different types of investors and how they get caught up in the emotions. For example, in the first case, they get caught up in the entrepreneur's enthusiasm, and they are they start seeing as the entrepreneur is seeing. Of course, like an entrepreneur is passionate about their idea, and an intuitive investor, because they can relate, on an empathetic level, they can relate more to the entrepreneur. They get caught up in the same emotions. Analytical investors are more likely to focus on the facts and cold judgments. And the idea, I think the context around this idea was to have a diversity in this group. Multiple investors, different types of investors who are weighing the idea. I'm not. I don't remember anything much. So at a surface level, this highlight makes sense, but I don't really have much more to add to that. So again, let's move on. Recursion. This was a novel. Yeah, I think it was a novel. It's been a while, so I completely forget the story. So I'm just going to try and read it. If I remember, great. Otherwise, I'll move on. The visual and auditory information arrive at your eyes and ears at different speeds, and then are processed by your brain at different speeds. Your brain waits for the slowest bit of stimulus to be processed, then reorders the neural inputs correctly and lets you experience them together as a simultaneous event, about half a second after what actually happened. We think we are perceiving the world directly and immediately, but everything we experience is this carefully edited, tape delayed reconstruction. Okay, somehow it doesn't feel like a novel to me, but I think this was a novel. Maybe it was kind of uh, a highlight within the novel, which is very non-fiction. So I'm not sure what to think of this third line over here. Your brain waits for the slowest bit of stimulus to be processed, then reorders. Yeah, I suppose it does. I'm not an expert in brains by any means, so I just don't know if I've read this elsewhere. And like I said, I'm misremembering this book as well. I think this was a fiction novel, and this quote doesn't make it seem like that. So I don't really know what to think. But this is supported by some of these things are supported by what I've read in other books about how brains work, about the neurology of ourselves. And the last line in this highlight, especially, we think we are perceiving the world directly and immediately, but that's not the case. This has come up multiple times in previous highlights as well about how brain is actually predicting what's going to happen before it happens. And so, this takes about half a second, like the highlight says, but our brain can immediately react to things even before it's completely processed it. There is this ability to predict that, okay, based on previous experiences, this is what's most likely to happen, and the brain will fill that in. And then, of course, it will correct it if it needs to be corrected. But for example, in most cases, uh, what the brain predicts exactly happens. For example, in the book for example, the 7.5 lessons about the brain. In that book, there is this note that when you drink a glass of water, you immediately feel satisfied. You're not thirsty anymore immediately. But in reality, water takes about 20 minutes to spread throughout the body, through blood and everything. So how is it that we are suddenly feeling, as soon as we drink water, we suddenly feel satisfied? And that's brain telling us that, okay, it's fine, water's there now. So it's kind of brain is jumping us to the conclusion even before it happens. So let's move on. The molecule of mood. Dopamine moving through different brain circuits yields different functions too, and towards a common and a relentless focus on enhancing the future. This book is more about dopamine. It's of course it's about brain, but it's the study of a very specific chemical, dopamine, and how that results in different behavioral traits within ourselves. And the book goes through the history of dopamine being called as a, what was it called, molecule of pleasure, or something related to pleasure. And this was the case because it was initially studied in drug addicts, and they noticed that dopamine circuits lit up when the addicts were given drugs. Whereas, with more research, it was found that it's not really about pleasure; it's more about reward prediction error. And it's like this highlight says, it's about the future. Dopamine is always dopamine always kicks in when we are excited about the future, and when we see certain things come to pass, that, for example, when a reward is completely a surprise for us. So in other words, reward prediction, or a scientific name for this. And that's when that's what dopamine induces, reward prediction error. And yeah, sorry about that. So I forgot to turn on the focus mode. But anyway, let's keep going. So yeah, I think this pretty much covers it. Let's move on. Everyday chaos. The rare visitors from the kingdom of accidents look like strangers because we have worked so hard on keeping them out. This It's a really interesting thing in the book. And so the book talks about kingdom of accidents, where as the real world, where nothing is predictable. It's messy, it is completely unstructured, it's completely organic, and you can't really predict what's going to happen anywhere. As compared to our world of normal, the typical Western mindset of well laid out cities, streets and streets crossing each other, intersections, and when you're out in the world, you can predict, you know that okay, this is what it's going to look like, and compare that to the kingdom of accidents, which is completely outside of kingdom of normal. And the point it makes in this particular section, not just this highlight, but in this particular section, is that the kingdom of accidents, it is much large. It's significantly larger than what we have considered normal. We have built neat little houses, neat little land plots, and houses on top of that, and rooms in top of that, and we expect that okay, everything is structured this way, but that's not the case. Nature is messy. It's organic. It doesn't follow these kind of boundaries, these kind of rules, and because we spend so much of our times around what is normal, all of this kingdom of accidents, they look like strangers. And they look like strangers because we have worked so hard on keeping them out. We have controlled every aspect of nature so that the things which are otherwise normal, the real world, they look like strangers to us. That's the point of this whole section, and again, this particular highlight. Let's go on. Becoming a category of one. If you're successful, that means you know what used to work. If you're successful, that means that you can compete and win in markets that no longer exist. They're gone. The game starts over today and it'll start over again tomorrow. It's really talking about basically not resting on your laurels. Um, if you think that because you're successful, you know what how to do the next thing, according to the book, according to this highlight, that's not enough. it, it just means that you know what used to work. You don't know what's going to work today. Maybe the entire field changes today, the entire market changes today. It's very possible. It happens, right? Disruption happens on a regular basis. In, for example, in the knowledge industry, disruption happens on a regular basis. How many times have we heard, okay, there's a new JavaScript framework? So the point here is that you can't rest on your laurels. You can't say that, okay, I have been successful, I know what's going to work, I'm going to do exactly this. No, that's lethargy. That's what's the word for that? Not compliance. I'm forgetting the word, but complacent. You're getting complacent in this while resting on your success, on your past success. But that doesn't mean anything. The game starts over today and will start over again tomorrow. So it's constant work. That's what the book points to. Let's move on. Originals. The worse companies perform, the more CEOs sought advice from friends and colleagues who shared their perspectives. They favored the comfort of consensus over the discomfort of dissent, which was precisely the opposite of what they should have done. So this is a trait that's like the section is the reflecting on the author is reflecting on different cases, different scenarios, uh, true 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 stories. Sorry, true accounts where when the companies performed worse, the CEOs, the leaders, they closed themselves to outside, and they wanted to. I mean, of course, they're bothered if the companies are not performing well, right? And they want to get into that comfort of what works, what they know works, and essentially in doing so, they're limiting their perspectives, and that's what the highlight talks about. They favor comfort of consensus over the discomfort of dissent. Whereas if the company is doing, it's not it's not performing well, you probably need dissent. You probably need to do some things in a different way. But yeah, like the highlight says, it was precisely the opposite of what they should have done. They should have welcomed dissent, whereas they relaxed in the comfort of consensus and they doubled down on it, and that goes into a spiral. We see those examples. For example, my assessment in in Twitter before takeover kind of got what's the word? They got comfortable in their own working model, and when things happen, for example, this whole messy thing, the takeover, and now the new management, new leadership style, and everything, and Okay, again, they're doubling down on the same thing. It's yeah, that sorry, they're doubling down on a different thing, but they're still essentially doubling down. And of course, it just means that Twitter, for example, in this example, Twitter, it's going to be vastly different. It could be successful, or it could look like a different kind of success. A one that Elon Musk is imagining. Whereas I don't really know if you really have to care about an absolute measure of success. It would Twitter would become a place like what imagine Elon Musk is imagining it to be. Is that a good thing for the world in general? It doesn't matter. Twitter is a private company anyway. But again, from a company perspective, uh, it is dissent. What if the company is not doing well? Dissent is what moves it ahead. Dissent is what gets it out of the loop that it's stuck in. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it in this highlight. Let's move on. 7.5 lessons about the brain. We this came up earlier. Brains of higher complexity can remember more. A brain doesn't store memories like files in a computer, of course. It reconstructs them on demand with electricity and swirling chemicals. You call this process remembering, but it's really assembling. A complex brain can assemble many more memories than either meatloaf brain or pocket knife brain could. And each time you have the same memory, your brain may have assembled with a different collection of neurons. That's degeneracy. So, before I explain, let's just consider meatloaf brain and pocket knife brain. So, meatloaf brain refers to a very simplistic brain where all neurons are connected to everything else. So, in our brains, neurons are not connected to everything else directly. Yeah, they are connected, but they're not connected directly to each other. It forms in the book. There is this example. This is this analogy of airlines in airports. There are hubs. There are smaller airports. So if you want to go from one smaller airport to another one, you go via a hub, and our brain neurons work like that. And in this particular highlight, and before this, the author is comparing with something called a meatloaf brain. I think it's like it's just coined within the book. A brain which is in which every neuron is connected to everything else, and a pocket knife brain in which where each there are different sections to brain, and each section is responsible for its own thing. For example, the common understanding of brain nowadays is that okay, there is a section of brain responsible for visual processing, like visual cortex and auditory cortex and left brain, right brain, and all of that. If you take it to the extreme, that each section of brain working on absolutely just one thing, that's what is referred to as pocket knife brain over here. But our brain is neither of these. It's a very different kind of structure. It's a highly complex organ, and it, like it says, it doesn't store memories like files in computer. It stores them, it reconstructs them. It's really, we call it remembering, but it's assembling. We are remembering feelings, we are remembering different inputs, sensory inputs, and they have been not stored in the conventional sense of storing files in a computer, but those signals and those chemicals help us in reassembling those memories. You can never really accurately remember those things. From our memories, we really can't really accurately remember each and everything. That is why that photographic memory, it's really a misnomer. There's nothing like a photographic memory. It's eidetic memory, and that's a whole different explanation. But yeah, I think and one last point this makes is that okay, each time you have the same memory, your brain may have assembled it with different collection of neurons, and that's degeneracy. That's why we remember, each time we remember something, we remember it a little differently. Anyway, let's move on. The genius zone. If you're excellent at something, people will always be asking you to do more of it. It feels good at first to be wanted and needed by more and more people, but ultimately, the more things you do in your excellence box, the more unfulfilled you end up feeling. And I feel that we know this, after a certain time, things that we are really good at, things that we really used to enjoy at one point of time, we don't really enjoy them anymore. And that's because we're good at it. It does not really, an explanation of another book, the one related to dopamine, it does not really produce that reward prediction area anymore. It's a known territory. We know this now. And that is why, like, again, like moving back to this book, in this book, they're talking about this excellent zone, things that you're so used to, you can do so well, you will be unfulfilled if you keep doing that because you're not really feeling that dopamine rush anymore. You're not really, let's use this language. you're unfulfilled. And that is why the book makes that okay, you have to make the book makes the book sorry let me wind up again. The book makes the point that you have to reach the genius zone, which is of course much more harder, it's much more uncomfortable. Excellence zone is your comfort zone, really, and that is why you end up unfulfilled. You're not really doing anything new. You're not really moving ahead. You're not getting that dopamine urge. Again, going back to that reference. Whereas genius zone, you're constantly climbing. It's really a loop. You're constantly taking on things that are uncomfortable for you, and you're constantly being hit by reward prediction error. That's dopamine. Again, I'm drifting back to that topic again and again. Anyway, let's move on. Anthro-Vision. Few financiers bother to talk with borrowers, pole dancers or not, or look at what happened on the ground in a holistic sense. The bird's eye mindset of financiers was the polar opposite of the worm's eye view of an anthropologist, which was precisely what made the situation dangerous. So this highlight is talking about the 2008 recession, and they're talking about so like the book explains it. It started with people getting a mortgage after another, and the real estate market booming, and everything, all the side effects of the situation. And the author makes a point that few financiers bothered to talk with the borrowers. They had a bird's eye view of the situation. They were looking at numbers, metrics from a very high level, and they thought that the market's doing well. Whereas what was needed was the worm's eye view of an anthropologist. Even that was needed in the picture, but that was missing, and that made the situation very dangerous. So let's, I think that's the highlight and last highlight, and this is how to use Readwise. So I'm just going to skip it like always. And that's the end for today's highlights. I think I feel it went on a little longer than usual. I'm seeing the timer to be almost 22 minutes. So I'm just going to stop right now. And you have a good day. Thank you, everyone.